Why did the instructor toss her a bent knife instead of a proper blade? The sound of it echoed in the cold hangar, steel meeting concrete with a dull, almost mocking clatter. A warped piece of metal curved at the tip like something already broken. That was the gift she was handed. That was the test. Warrant Officer Anna Petrova didn't blink. She didn't ask for another weapon. She didn't curse or argue like anyone else might have. She just looked down at it, then back up at the man who had thrown it, Sergeant Thorne, the kind of instructor who enjoyed breaking people more than building them. His face carried the smug patience of someone who believed he had already won. He was waiting for her to protest, to demand fairness, to show weakness. But Anna gave him nothing. Silence, stillness, that was her answer. The problem lay in front of her, plain and sharp. The bent knife was not an obstacle. It was just another detail in a long line of details life had always hurled her way. And she had no intention of failing here. Not at Fort Griffin, not in front of them. The Alaskan air outside was already merciless, knifing through exposed skin, whispering reminders that nature would take what it wanted from the unprepared. Fort Griffin was built for men who thought themselves tougher than nature. Diesel fumes and pine smoke clung to the air, mingling with the odor of sweat and skepticism. This place had no room for softness, no room for doubt. From the moment she had arrived, Anna was seen as an intrusion. A woman in her late 30s, quiet, severe, pulled from a records department so redacted it was practically a blank page. To the officers, she was a question mark, and questions were dangerous. Colonel Davies, the man who signed her orders, had seen her as a mistake the moment she stood in his office. He wanted her gone before she even began. Her file was a thin scattering of official jargon, liaison duties, administrative support, nothing that spoke of field experience, certainly nothing that screamed Arctic survival. The colonel had leaned back in his polished leather chair, fingers tapping the empty paper trail in irritation. "We have standards here," he'd said, his voice edged with disdain. "This isn't a wilderness badge for desk jockeys. Sergeant Thorne will make that clear." Anna had said nothing, no defense, no excuses, no plea, just a single precise nod. Understood. That silence unnerved him more than an argument ever could, because silence leaves people with their own thoughts. Silence makes them wonder what you're hiding. Now standing in the pre-dawn gloom of the briefing hangar, Anna kept to the side. 20 soldiers filled the room, young, loud, nervous, trying too hard to disguise it with brittle laughter. They were proud to be here. They had been handpicked for this survival, evasion, resistance, and escape course, the harshest test Fort Griffin had to offer. To them, Anna was a curiosity at best, a mistake at worst. She didn't belong. She didn't tell them otherwise. Instead, she watched. A young private named Miller fumbled with the straps on his pack, its weight pulling unevenly against his shoulders. Another Chen had strapped his water bladders outside his gear, easy to puncture. A corporal tried too hard to look calm, his hands trembling just enough to betray him. Anna cataloged it all with a quiet detachment, the way a cartographer maps terrain. Weaknesses, strengths, fault lines that would matter when the storm hit. Sergeant Thorne strode in, a barrel-chested bulldog of a man whose chest ribbons seemed larger than his patience. His voice grated like gravel. "Listen up. This course is designed to find your breaking point. The forest doesn't care about your rank. It doesn't care about your feelings. And it sure as hell doesn't care about your gender." The jab was obvious. The laughter it provoked from a few soldiers was predictable. Anna's eyes stayed fixed on the wall chart, studying weather patterns, reading the storm's approach like an omen no one else could see. The forest, not the sergeant, would be the real test, and the forest was already moving against them. The last item on the checklist was gear. Knives. Thorne handed out pristine kabars one by one, letting the soldiers feel their sharpness, their weight. When he reached Anna, he hesitated. Then, with deliberate cruelty, he smashed the final blade against a steel post, bending its tip into a hook before tossing it at her feet. "Last one, warrant officer," he said, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Make it work." The bent knife was a declaration. "You are less. You don't belong. You will fail." Anna picked it up, turned it in her hand. The warped edge wasn't useless, it was simply different. A hook for peeling bark, a gouge for carving, a scraper, a tool, not a weapon. She saw possibility where others saw insult. Without a word, she slid it into her belt. Thorne held her gaze, expecting anger. Instead, he met something harder to confront: focus. Cold, steady, terrifying focus. And for a fraction of a second, it unsettled him. Then the storm began. The helicopter's ramp dropped, unleashing a wall of freezing air and sleet that battered the team before they even set foot on the ground. The landscape stretched out endless and gray, stunted spruce, muskeg, and sky that pressed low like a lid. The mission seemed simple: travel 20 miles east to a designated extraction point in 48 hours. Live off the land, survive. But simplicity only existed on paper. Within an hour, sleet thickened into wet snow, visibility dropped to nothing, and the cold turned merciless. Compasses spun uselessly, GPS units flickered and died as their batteries drained in minutes. The soldiers, confidence shattered like glass. "Sergeant, we've lost signal," one shouted over the howl of the wind. Thorne's frustration broke through his barked orders. He was a good instructor in controlled drills. This was no longer controlled. Panic prickled along the edges of the group. Anna walked at the rear, her pace steady, unhurried. She didn't fight the storm, she moved with it, conserving strength. While others wrestled with dead electronics, she read the land, the lean of lichen on trees, the drift of snow on ridges, the gradient of the ground under her boots. She wasn't following technology. She was following nature. The first real crisis struck 3 hours in. Private Miller slipped on ice and fell with a sound that silenced everyone, the sickening crack of bone. His leg bent at an unnatural angle, compound fracture. His cries pierced the storm. The medic's hands shook too badly to help. Thorne's radio screamed nothing but static. Chaos threatened to consume them. Anna stepped forward, calm as the storm raged. "Hold him steady." It wasn't a request. Her voice cut through panic like a blade through cloth. The others obeyed without hesitation. She ignored the medic kit, too clumsy, too slow. She unsheathed the bent knife, drove it into a nearby birch, and peeled away long strips of bark. With practiced ease, she carved shavings into antiseptic pulp, mixed with pine needles Chen had gathered earlier at her quiet suggestion. Crude medicine. She found 2 straight branches, cut precise notches with the hooked tip, and bound them with waxed cord from her pack. A splint, perfect, strong, fast. Miller's leg stabilized, his pain dulled, the bleeding slowed. In 5 minutes, Anna had done what panic had nearly destroyed. She had taken a useless blade, a broken situation, and carved order from it. The soldiers stared at her in stunned silence. For the first time, the authority in the group shifted, not with words, not with command, but with competence. Even Thorne saw it. His arrogance faltered. Anna met his gaze, calm, level. "He needs warmth. We build shelter now." And with that, she led them. They followed. The storm still howled. The cold still bit. But the center of gravity had changed. The quiet woman no one wanted had become the one they could not survive without. What kind of soldier builds a fire in a storm that kills radios? That was the question hanging in the freezing air as Anna crouched low, her body shielding a fragile bundle of tinder from the wind's assault. Sparks danced, caught, and for one terrifying second threatened to vanish in the gale. Then a tiny ember glowed alive, crackling into flame. The men stared as though she had conjured it from nothing. They had been ready to accept death as an inevitability. She made survival look like inevitability instead. By the time the Quinzee was finished, snow piled and carved into a shelter, branches layered for insulation, the group had stopped second-guessing her. They moved under her direction with the desperation of drowning men clinging to a lifeline. Sergeant Thorne gave orders, yes, but the eyes of the team searched for Anna's nod, her quiet confirmation before acting. Without words, command had shifted. Inside the shelter, breath steamed the narrow space. Miller lay still, fever breaking under the crude poultice she'd brewed. Chen whispered a thank you under his breath. Even Thorne, whose authority had cracked in the blizzard, kept stealing glances at her bent knife, as if it were more alive than his own pristine gear. But Anna did not speak of what she knew. She offered instruction only in fragments: tie it tighter, angle it with the wind, drink slow, not fast. She was not teaching them survival, she was showing them something far more unsettling: how to think like the wilderness itself. The second day dawned in silence. The storm had spent its rage, leaving behind a barren, blinding whiteness. The sun hovered low, pale as a coin behind steel-gray clouds. The team crawled from their snow shelter, stiff, exhausted, but alive. For a brief moment there was relief, until they saw what awaited them. A river swollen with meltwater foamed before them, twice the width the map promised, too deep to ford, too violent to swim. Their extraction point lay on the other side. "We can't cross that," Thorne muttered, frustration tightening his jaw. "Standard procedure is to go upstream, find a narrower point, maybe build a raft." But he glanced at Miller's makeshift stretcher. "That would cost us a day. He doesn't have that long." The men turned to Anna, not because she demanded their attention, but because their eyes no longer sought anyone else. She studied the river, the current, the trees, the air. Then her gaze landed on a fallen spruce, half submerged, its trunk jutting across the torrent. It wasn't a bridge, but it was a beginning. "We're not going around," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. "We're going over." The soldiers exchanged looks of disbelief. A rope traverse across a raging Alaskan river without proper gear was insanity. It was also the only way forward. She stripped her pack of every cord, lace, and strap. The men followed, handing over their own: bootlaces, paracord, the innards of straps. Piece by piece, Anna braided, twisted, and tied until a single rope took form, strong enough to bear weight. Her hands moved with speed and precision that spoke of long practice in places no one here had ever been. The final challenge was to get the line across. She tied a climber's knot to a rock, gauged the distance, and swung. The stone arced through the gray sky and landed perfectly, looping over a branch on the far side. Gasps filled the air. She didn't celebrate. She just pulled, securing the rope into a taut, trembling line. Without hesitation, she clipped herself in with a safety cord fashioned from her own belt and crossed first. Her body moved like water, fluid, balanced, unshaken by the torrent beneath her. On the far bank, she secured the anchor, then came back across. "Your turn," she said simply. One by one, they followed. Hands burned raw, arms trembling with exhaustion, fear rising as the river snarled below. Yet they crossed. Even Miller, dragged across with a harness she'd built from scraps, made it. And when the last man stepped onto solid ground, they were not just a team. They were something harder, forged. When their boots sank into the snow of the far bank, they knew what it meant to survive under her shadow. Later, as they marched toward the extraction point, Chen glanced at the bent knife on her hip, scratched, dulled by labor yet still the most essential tool among them. He whispered, almost in awe, "It saved us." Anna didn't answer. Her silence wasn't pride. It wasn't humility. It was focus, an understanding that the mission wasn't over, that survival was never about one moment of triumph. It was about the next obstacle and the one after that. Back at Fort Griffin, Colonel Davies sat staring at his command screen. The trackers were dead, signals lost in the storm. A corrupted burst of data had come through, just enough to reveal biometrics. 19 heart rates spiked into panic, 19 core temperatures dropping, 19 soldiers in visible distress. And one anomaly. A steady line, 60 beats per minute, core temperature stable, no stress spikes. "Whose is it?" Davies demanded. "Warrant Officer Petrova, sir." Davies felt his throat tighten. Sitting behind his desk, insulated from the cold, he felt a chill seep through him. He had dismissed her as filler. He had expected her to fail. Yet her vitals read like she was in a quiet room sipping tea, not in a blizzard with a dying private and a fractured team. It didn't make sense, unless... He shoved the thought away. It had to be luck, a fluke, nothing more. But luck doesn't build fire in snow. Luck doesn't splint bones with bark. Luck doesn't cross rivers on braided scraps of cord. Out in the white wilderness, Anna Petrova walked at the front of the column now, her steps certain, her bent knife glinting against her hip. The soldiers followed, not because they were told to, but because they believed no other path led to survival. What they didn't know, what none of them yet understood, was that the forest had met her before, that she had been here before in storms worse than this, with odds far crueler than these. But that part of her story she kept silent, for now. Why was her heartbeat steady when everyone else's was spiking like an alarm? That question haunted Colonel Davies as he sat in the warmth of the command center, staring at the biometric graph glowing on his screen. 19 soldiers, each body screaming in distress, and one utterly calm. It didn't make sense. No one was that calm, not in conditions like these, unless calm wasn't new to her, unless she'd lived in storms before. Out in the snowfields, Anna Petrova led the way. The storm had broken, but its wreckage lay everywhere. Trees bent under the weight of ice. Rivers swollen past their limits. Drifts piled higher than men's shoulders. The Chugach forest had turned into a labyrinth that swallowed compasses and laughed at maps. Yet Anna walked as if she had memorized every curve, every shadow. The others stumbled, cursing, slipping. She adjusted her pace to match theirs without a word. When Miller's stretcher snagged on roots, she shifted weight, took the strain herself, and kept moving. The silence between them grew heavy. Not the silence of strangers anymore, but something closer to reverence. Men who had once smirked at her presence now kept their eyes locked on her back, as though by watching her shoulders they could draw strength for their own. Still, beneath that respect lay something else, unease. Because it wasn't normal, the way she never seemed to tire, never lost her breath, never let fear crack her voice. The storm had shaken them to their bones. It had barely touched her. And though they followed her without question, part of them whispered the same thought. What is she? By midday, they reached a ridge that should have given them a view of their extraction zone. Instead, they saw only emptiness, an endless sweep of broken trees and snowfields, horizons swallowed by clouds. The GPS units were still dead. The map might as well have been a child's drawing. Frustration cracked through the team. "We're lost," one soldier muttered, his voice sharp with fatigue. "Quiet," Thorne snapped, but even his authority rang hollow. He was no longer the center of this group. Anna was, and everyone knew it. Anna crouched low, brushing snow from the ground. Her bent knife flashed as she carved into the crust, exposing soil. She sifted a handful through her fingers, then looked up at the sky, pale and indifferent above them. She pointed east, there. "How can you know that?" Thorne asked, suspicion edging his words. Anna didn't answer. She simply started walking. They followed. Hours later, they stumbled upon a clearing scarred by the storm. A stand of fallen spruce, bark stripped by wind, trunks crisscrossed like bones. In the center, half buried beneath snow, Anna found what she'd been searching for. The remains of a fire ring, blackened stones, a circle no larger than a helmet. It was old, years old, forgotten. But Anna stared at it like a memory. Her fingers brushed the stones. For the briefest moment her face shifted, something unguarded flickered across her expression. Recognition, loss, perhaps even guilt. Then it was gone, replaced by the same cold stillness she always carried. The men didn't see it, but Thorne did, and it unsettled him more than the storm ever had. That night they built another Quinzee. The men huddled inside, exhausted. Anna kept watch outside, sitting cross-legged in the snow, bent knife laid across her lap like an old companion. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even seem to blink. Chen crept out once, unable to sleep. "You don't rest?" he asked quietly. Anna turned her head, eyes catching the faint light of the dying fire. "I'll rest when it's safe." Something about the way she said it made him swallow his next question. He wanted to ask, safe from what? But the weight in her voice told him he might not want the answer. Back at Fort Griffin, Davies was unraveling. He paced his office, replaying her silence in his mind, the unreadable face, the thin file, the calm vitals. It all fit together in ways he didn't want to admit. He'd seen whispers in reports years ago, rumors carried like campfire stories through classified channels. A name, never confirmed, always half-myth. Kestrel. He shook the thought away. Myths don't walk into offices with transfer orders. Myths don't carry bent knives. And yet, by dawn, Anna's team was moving again. Miller was weak but alive, carried with grim determination by the others. The forest shifted from snowfields to dense stands of black spruce, branches heavy, the world closing in. Every sound, snapping twigs, distant cracking ice, echoed louder than it should have. The men's nerves frayed. They were soldiers, trained for combat, but this silence gnawed at them in ways bullets never had. Anna, though, moved like the forest belonged to her. Her eyes scanned constantly, marking signs they couldn't see. A faint trail of hair tracks, a patch of snow disturbed where wind hadn't reached, the subtle bend of grass under the weight of something heavier than snow. She didn't tell them what she read, not yet. By afternoon they heard it, the chop of helicopter blades, extraction. The men nearly wept in relief. They broke into a run, cresting a ridge toward a clearing where the bird waited, rotors whipping snow into the air. But Anna didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the tree line, on shadows shifting just beyond sight. Thorne noticed her stillness. "What is it?" She didn't answer. She only said quietly, "Keep your rifles close." And then, for the first time, the men realized something chilling. This had never felt like a training exercise to her, not once. Why did she hesitate when the helicopter appeared? For the men, the sound of rotor blades was salvation. For her, it was something else entirely. A pause, a calculation, a memory perhaps. Snow whipped into the air as the aircraft descended, beating the forest into submission with its downdraft. The soldiers stumbled forward, relief breaking across their faces. 2 days in the storm, 2 nights of fear, hunger, and pain, all of it seemed worth it as the bird touched down in the clearing. But Anna Petrova stood still. Her eyes weren't on the helicopter. They were on the tree line beyond, shadows twisting in the wind, branches swaying with unnatural rhythm. She had seen this before. Men too eager to believe the fight was over, too quick to let their guard down. That was when mistakes killed. "Why aren't you moving?" Thorne's voice was sharp, almost desperate, as if her stillness mocked his own eagerness. Anna didn't look at him. She kept her gaze on the dark edge of the forest, her hand resting lightly on the bent knife at her belt. "Rifles," she said softly. "Keep them close." The men froze. Her tone was calm, but beneath it lay a gravity that made their throats tighten. They obeyed, even as doubt flickered in their eyes. Was this paranoia, or instinct honed sharper than reason? No threat revealed itself. The shadows remained only shadows. Slowly, reluctantly, the team moved to the helicopter, lifting Miller onto the ramp. The birds shuddered under their weight, engines straining against the snow-laden air. Anna boarded last. Her boots clanged against the metal deck, and for the first time in 48 hours she allowed herself a breath that wasn't survival-driven. The door clanged shut. The bird lifted, snow scattering like ghosts beneath them. The flight back to Fort Griffin was silent. Not the exhausted silence of soldiers finished with an ordeal, but something deeper. Reverence. Confusion. The men glanced at her in secret, their eyes betraying the thought none dared voice aloud. Who was she? Miller lay propped against the bulkhead, his face pale but alive, thanks to her. His gaze never left her. For him, she was no longer a fellow trainee. She was the reason he'd see home again. Even Thorne, bruised pride written across his face, sat wordless. He had mocked her, tested her, tried to break her with a bent blade. Now he watched her in silence, as though measuring the depth of his own failure against the unfathomable stillness in her eyes. Back at Fort Griffin, the hangar doors yawned open to receive them. Colonel Davies stood waiting, posture stiff, jaw tight. The cold air cut sharper inside the hangar than it had outside. This wasn't relief, it was judgment. "Report," Davies snapped, eyes fixed on Thorne. The sergeant straightened, his voice carrying none of its usual bravado. He recounted the storm, the failed equipment, Miller's injury, the shelter, the river crossing. His words painted a picture Davies didn't want to see, and when he reached Anna's role, his voice faltered, not from doubt but from conviction. "She saved us," Thorne said, simple, blunt, "all of us." The room stilled. The young soldiers nodded almost imperceptibly, their silence heavier than words. Davies' gaze shifted to Anna. He expected arrogance, vindication, some flash of triumph at proving him wrong. Instead, he found nothing but that same quiet depth. It infuriated him more than arrogance ever could. "It was luck," Davies said, almost to himself. "A fluke, nothing more." The hangar door groaned open again, cutting off his denial. Boots struck concrete with a weight that silenced the room. A figure entered, broad-shouldered, uniform immaculate, face carved by decades of war. Sergeant Major Elias Vance, a living legend in the Alaskan Command. He rarely visited forward bases. His presence here was an event in itself. He scanned the formation once, his eyes locked on Anna. And he stopped dead. For a heartbeat, disbelief washed over him, then something else, recognition. "My God," he breathed, voice low, almost reverent, "Kestrel." The name fell into the silence like a grenade. Every man in that hangar knew it, not from files, no file dared contain it, but from whispers. Campfire rumors passed in shadows, a ghost story for soldiers, the one who appeared when no one else could. The one who hunted in silence, saved teams no one else could reach, survived what no one else could endure. Kestrel. Colonel Davies went pale. He had heard the stories too, though he dismissed them as myth. But myths don't stop battle-hardened sergeant majors in their tracks. Vance stepped forward, ignoring rank, ignoring protocol. His eyes never left Anna. "Do you know what you sent into that storm with a bent knife?" he demanded, his voice sharp now, directed at Davies. "Do you have any idea who she is?" Davies stammered, searching for denial, but Vance didn't wait. 20 years ago," he said, his voice carrying across the hangar, "my unit was pinned down in Chechnya, surrounded, wounded. No comms, we were finished. And then she came. Alone. For 3 days she hunted the hunters, got us all out alive. The only weapon she had at the end was a shard of shrapnel." His eyes softened, not in pity, but in reverence. "Her name isn't in the files because what she's done doesn't belong in files." The young soldiers shifted, glancing at one another. Awe etched itself onto their faces. They hadn't just survived the storm with a stranger. They had been led by a legend. Thorne's face burned red. The man who had mocked her, who had tossed her a broken blade, stood now in the presence of someone who had survived battles he could barely imagine. His shame was a weight he couldn't hide. Davies felt his authority crumble, slipping through his fingers like snow. He had dismissed her as filler. He had tried to break her with paperwork and disdain. Instead, she had exposed him, not with defiance, but with competence so vast it dwarfed his command. He opened his mouth, searching for words. None came. What apology could suffice? What order could matter? Anna met his gaze. No triumph, no vindication, only stillness. The same stillness she had carried from the first moment she stepped into his office. His opinion had never mattered. Survival had. The silence grew unbearable, and then without prompting Private Chen snapped to attention. His hand rose in a salute so sharp it cut the air. One by one the others followed, even Thorne. It was not protocol, it was not order, it was instinct. Respect, unshakable and absolute. Anna walked past them without acknowledgement, but every man there knew she had seen it, and that was enough. Later in the solitude of her barracks, Anna sat on her bunk. The storm was behind her. The hangar's echoes had faded. She held the bent knife in her hands, thumb brushing its scars. Every notch told a story. Bark peeled for medicine, wood carved for shelter, snow cut for fire. It was flawed, damaged, a symbol meant to break her. Instead, it had become her salvation. She didn't try to straighten the bend. Instead, with slow, patient strokes, she sharpened it, hunting the edge, redefining its purpose. It was no longer just a knife. It was a testament, a reminder. That sometimes, the things meant to break you become the very tools that save you. She set the blade down on the nightstand, its crooked point catching the faint starlight filtering through the barracks window. Outside, the Alaskan wilderness lay quiet, vast, eternal. Anna exhaled, slow, steady. She had no need for recognition, no hunger for glory. Her victory was simple, silent. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Why did she sharpen a knife that had already proven itself? The men who passed her bunk that evening thought nothing of it, a soldier maintaining her gear after a mission. But for Anna Petrovna, each slow stroke of stone against steel was not maintenance. It was ritual, memory, a way of asking herself a question she wasn't sure she wanted answered. What was she doing here? The barracks was silent, save for the scraping rhythm of blade on stone. Outside, the wind pressed against the thin walls, restless. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the window, hair pulled back, face expressionless, eyes hollow. Not the face of a hero, not the ghost they whispered about, just a woman tired of carrying names. Kestrel. The word still hung in the air of the hangar, heavy as smoke. Sergeant Major Vance had spoken it with awe. The younger soldiers had repeated it under their breath with reverence. Colonel Davies had swallowed it like poison. But Anna didn't claim it, she never had. She had left it behind years ago, buried in classified files and unmarked graves. A call sign, a shadow, a phantom to frighten enemies and inspire allies. It was useful back then, necessary, but it was never her. She was not Kestrel, not anymore. And yet when she closed her eyes, fragments returned. The snap of frozen branches under boots that weren't hers. The weight of a wounded man slung over her shoulder, his blood freezing against her coat. 3 days without fire, hunted by men who didn't know they were the prey. A shard of shrapnel clenched in her hand because it was all she had left to fight with. That was the mission Sergeant Major Vance had spoken of, but it wasn't the only one. There were others, too many. And every one of them had left scars, not all on her body. She had walked out of jungles, deserts, mountains. She had walked away from ambushes, betrayals, black sites that never existed. But what she had never walked away from were the faces, the eyes of those who didn't survive. Teammates, enemies, civilians who had been collateral in operations no one would ever admit happened. Those faces lived in her silence. She had thought a transfer to Fort Griffin would be different, a chance to fade into anonymity, paperwork, liaison duties, a quiet end to a career that had demanded too much of her soul already. But the storm had dragged her back. The bent knife had become her reminder. No matter how much she tried to live as Anna Petrovna, the world would always find Kestrel when it needed her. A knock came at her door, sharp, tentative. "Come," she said, voice low. Private Chen stepped in, awkward in the dim light. His uniform was creased, his salute uncertain. He wasn't here under orders. He was here because he couldn't help it. I just wanted to, he hesitated, shifting his weight, say thank you for Miller, for all of us. Anna looked at him, silent. The weight of her gaze made him stumble through words. I've been through training before, ma'am, hard training, but I've never seen, the way you, he cut himself off, embarrassed. It wasn't like following orders. It was different, like you knew what was going to happen before it happened. Anna didn't answer immediately. She set the knife down, the bent edge gleaming in the lamplight. Experience, she said finally. Chen nodded quickly, but the word felt too small, too ordinary to describe what he'd witnessed. He wanted to ask more. Who was she, really? But something in her expression warned him off. He gave another stiff nod, then retreated, closing the door softly behind him. Anna sat in the silence again, alone with the bent knife, alone with memory. The next morning the hangar buzzed with whispers. The name had spread, Kestrel. None of the young soldiers spoke it too loudly, but their eyes betrayed them when she entered. Salutes came faster now, sharper, offered not because of rank but because of reverence. She hated it. It wasn't respect for her. It was worship of a ghost, a myth, something that had swallowed years of her life and left her hollow. Colonel Davies avoided her. He had been humbled publicly and permanently, yet his resentment lingered, simmering beneath his forced politeness. She saw it in the stiffness of his posture, the clipped edges of his words. He would never forgive her, not for surviving, not for proving him wrong. Men like Davies preferred myths to be under their control. Sergeant Thorne, however, was different. Shame clung to him, yes, but shame has a way of softening pride. He sought her out that day, waiting for her near the training grounds. I gave you that bent knife to break you, he admitted, voice rough. You made it into something else, something I can't explain. I was wrong. Anna studied him for a moment. His apology was not elegant, but it was sincere. You weren't wrong, she said quietly. You just didn't understand. Thorne frowned. Understand what? That a weapon is only ever as broken as the hand that holds it. Her words lingered long after she walked away. That night Anna dreamed, not of storms or knives, but of silence. She was back in another forest, another lifetime. The faces of men she had saved blurred with the faces of those she hadn't. The bent knife lay in her hand, only it wasn't bent anymore. It was sharp, perfect, gleaming. And somehow that made it worse, because perfection doesn't forgive. She woke with her heart steady, her breath calm, her body ready. Years of conditioning had burned away the panic of dreams, yet the weight of memory clung to her like frost. She sat up, reached for the knife on her nightstand, and held it in the dim light. She had thought she could disappear into anonymity, into silence, but silence had a way of carrying echoes. And now Fort Griffin echoed with a name she no longer wanted. Kestrel. Why did the base go silent just after midnight? No alarms, no announcements, just a power cut that rippled through Fort Griffin like a held breath. The hum of generators stopped, lights flickered out. The sudden absence of sound was louder than any explosion. Anna Petrova sat on her bunk, boots laced, knife resting on the nightstand. She hadn't been sleeping. She rarely did. When the silence struck, she felt it not as surprise but as inevitability. She slid the knife back to her belt before the emergency lights blinked on. The others stirred, groggy, muttering. A few cursed the cold as heaters shut down. But Anna rose calm, scanning the room, eyes narrowing at the faint smell in the air, not just diesel and pine, something metallic, oily, out of place. She knew that scent. By the time the first siren finally wailed, she was already in the hallway, boots hitting concrete in steady rhythm. Soldiers poured from their barracks, some half-dressed, some clutching rifles, confusion written on their faces. Colonel Davies stormed from the command center, barking orders with the brittle edge of a man trying to mask his own fear. Generators down, sabotage suspected, lock down the armory. The words struck like stones. Sabotage, not storm damage, not bad wiring. Someone had cut their power. Eyes darted to Anna as she passed. They didn't know why. Maybe they wanted her calm. Maybe they wanted her legend. But their gazes followed her like moths to flame. Sergeant Thorne caught up to her, his voice low. "You smell it too." She gave a single nod. He didn't ask what. He didn't need to. He had seen enough in the storm to understand she sensed things before others did. The two moved through the dim corridors, emergency lights casting long shadows. The silence pressed in, broken only by the distant thrum of soldiers scrambling to follow conflicting orders. At the armory doors they found it, a padlock cut clean, not forced, precision, deliberate, the steel still warm from friction. Davies arrived seconds later, flanked by MPs, his face blanched at the sight. "Got him it." His voice trembled with something he rarely showed, fear. Anna crouched, tracing the cut edges with a fingertip. Not sloppy, professional. Whoever had done this knew their craft. She looked at Davies, her expression unreadable. "This isn't kids with bolt cutters," she said. "This is trained." Her words landed like a sentence. Davies blustered, rattling orders, demanding sweeps, lockdowns, but Anna barely heard him. Her mind was already moving, mapping possibilities, calculating intentions. Sabotage meant more than theft. Sabotage meant a message, or a test. Hours passed with no intruder found. The base simmered with unease. Soldiers tightened patrols, rifles clutched tighter, eyes scanning shadows like enemies lurked in every corner. The silence of the wilderness pressed against the perimeter, vast and unknowable. Inside the mess hall the next morning, whispers swirled. Chen leaned across the table toward Miller, whose crutches rested against his chair. "You think it's a drill?" he asked. Miller shook his head, not the way she looked last night. Anna sat alone at the edge of the room, eating slowly, movements precise. She didn't join their whispers, but she heard them all. She always did. The myth of Kestrel hung heavier now. The soldiers wanted her to act, to lead. But she wasn't here to lead. She had come here to disappear. And yet, the opportunity presented itself that afternoon. A patrol failed to check in. Standard procedure said to wait an hour, assume radio failure. But Anna's gut said otherwise. She approached Thorne quietly. "They're not coming back." He studied her face. There was no doubt in her tone, no hesitation, just cold certainty. "You're saying—" "I'm saying we need to find them, now." They moved fast, cutting into the forest east of the base, snow crunching under boots. The air bit sharper here, silence so thick it pressed into lungs. Chen and two others followed reluctantly, their nerves raw but unwilling to be left behind. Half a mile out they found it. Tracks in the snow. Not just soldiers' boots, heavier, staggered, dragging, signs of struggle. The patrol hadn't gone missing. They'd been taken. Chen's breath caught in his throat. By who? Anna crouched low, gloved fingers brushing the snow, reading the story written there. The angles, the weight shifts, the spacing between steps. She saw it all unfold in her mind. "Not amateurs," she murmured. "Not locals. This was coordinated." Thorne's jaw tightened. "How do you?" "Because I've seen this before." Her voice carried the weight of memories she didn't want to name. The myth cracked through, whether she liked it or not. They followed the tracks deeper into the trees, tension rising with every step. The forest seemed to close around them, shadows growing longer, silence heavier. And then, just as the light began to dim, they heard it. Voices, low, foreign, confident. Thorne raised a hand, signaling halt. The men froze, eyes wide. Anna didn't move. She studied the voices, the cadence, the rhythm. Recognition flickered behind her eyes. Not training, not drills, not ghosts. Real. Enemies in their forest. For the first time since the storm, the soldiers saw something different in her expression. Not just calm, not just focus, but something darker, a switch flipping inside her. The part of her she had buried, now clawing its way back. "Kestrel. Why did the forest feel different when they heard those voices? It wasn't just the sound, it was the weight of it, the way the air shifted, the way silence broke, not like an accident but like a warning. For the first time since the storm, the men realized they were not training anymore. They were being hunted. Sergeant Thorne raised his rifle, sweat beading under his collar despite the cold. Chen's knuckles whitened on his weapon. Miller, leaning heavily on his crutches back at base, would never know what they were about to face. But Anna knew. Her body didn't tense. Her breathing didn't quicken. She simply shifted her weight slightly, bent knife resting in her hand as if it belonged there. She listened to the voices. 2 men. No, 3. Moving with precision, not panic. Their boots pressed into the snow at measured intervals, too disciplined for locals. She leaned close to Thorne. Her whisper was steady, almost unnervingly calm. Not amateurs, professional, Eastern cadence, probably ex-military. Thorne glanced at her, eyes narrowing. How the hell do you know that? She didn't answer. She couldn't explain that her ear had been trained in half a dozen war zones, that she had cataloged the differences between footsteps in mountains, deserts, jungles. That silence had been her teacher, her weapon. Instead, she just said, "Because I've been here before." The words landed with more weight than gunfire. The men froze, looking to her. They were soldiers, yes, but none of them had faced this. And in their hesitation, she felt it, their instinct to hand her command. It wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. She accepted it without a word. "Positions," she said softly. 2 spread left, 1 with me, stay low, don't fire unless you have no choice." They obeyed instantly. Not because she outranked them, but because her tone carried something authority never could: certainty. Anna moved like shadow. The forest seemed to part for her as she slipped between trees, her steps precise, silent, measured. The soldiers tried to mimic her, but their crunching boots sounded loud against her silence. She didn't scold them. She just adapted, angling her movements to absorb their noise into hers, covering mistakes the way a veteran covers a rookie's flank. They reached a ridge overlooking the intruders. 3 men exactly as she judged. Their gear was mismatched but functional, K-variants, insulated jackets, radios. They weren't scouting. They were waiting. Anna studied them with eyes that didn't just see positions but patterns. One scanned the tree line, too often paranoid. Another checked his weapon compulsively, disciplined but nervous. The third leaned back casually, smoke curling from his lips, too confident. Leaders often did that. "Ambush," she whispered. "They've got others close." The soldiers stiffened. The words struck like frost in their veins. They weren't hunters, they were bait. "What do we do?" Chen asked, voice tight. Anna looked at him. For the first time she saw not just fear but trust. He would follow her into anything. They all would. Her silence stretched a beat too long, because she knew the answer wasn't one she wanted. To get them out alive, she would have to stop being Anna Petrova. She would have to be Kestrel again. She felt the weight of it, heavy as the storm, heavy as every mission she had buried. Her bent knife glinted as she drew it. She closed her eyes for a breath, as if making peace with the choice. "Follow me." The men tensed. They moved down the ridge, silent as they could manage. The intruders didn't see them at first. The storm had left the ground broken, visibility tricky. But when one turned, eyes catching movement, Anna was already on him. The bent knife flashed, not with rage but with efficiency. A quick hook behind the knee, a twist, a body collapsing into the snow before a sound could escape. She caught him, eased him down, knife pressed to his throat. His weapon clattered softly, muffled by snow. The other 2 turned, startled, rifles rising. Shots cracked, echoing through the trees. Bark splintered. Snow burst. The soldiers returned fire, clumsy but desperate. Anna moved between them, not away. Her knife was no longer bent steel. It was extension, motion, purpose. She closed the distance with terrifying calm, knocking one rifle wide with the hooked tip, twisting, driving the man into the ground. The second stumbled back, panicked, firing wildly. Chen froze, Thorne shouted. The world became noise. And then silence again. Anna stood over the last intruder, his rifle snapped in two, her knife steady at his throat. He stared at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. Not at Anna. At Kestrel. The name was written in his fear. She saw it even if he didn't speak it. The forest went still. Only the soldiers' ragged breathing remained. Thorne's rifle shook in his hands. That wasn't training, he said, his voice low, haunted. No, Anna answered. Her tone was flat, final. It was. The truth settled heavy over them. This wasn't a storm. This wasn't survival training. Someone had sent professionals into Alaskan wilderness, and their patrol had been the first to fall. Chen looked at her, awe battling terror in his eyes. He had wanted to believe she was just a woman with experience, just lucky, just calm. But what he had just seen was something else. Something they couldn't name, but everyone understood. Kestrel. Anna wiped the blade clean in the snow, her face unreadable. She looked at the men, their rifles trembling, their eyes wide. "You're soldiers," she said quietly. "Act like it, or you won't survive what's coming." Her words weren't harsh. They weren't cruel, they were truth. And in that truth, the soldiers felt both fear and strange comfort. Because if she was Kestrel, then maybe survival was possible. But Anna felt something else. The weight of inevitability. She had tried to bury Kestrel, tried to live as Anna Petrova, quiet, unseen. But tonight, in the Alaskan forest, the ghost had risen. Not because she wanted it, not because she claimed it, but because the world had forced it from her again. And once the ghost walked, it never left quietly. Why did the enemy know her name before she spoke it? The man on the ground, throat pinned beneath her bent knife, didn't plead, didn't bargain. His wide eyes locked on her face as if he had seen it before, though he couldn't have. His lips trembled with words he didn't finish. She didn't need him to. Recognition had weight even when unspoken. Kestrel. It was written in his fear. Anna held his gaze for a long beat, then released him. She didn't kill. Not here. Not yet. But the message was delivered all the same. You were never the hunter, I was. The soldiers behind her shifted uneasily. Their rifles still shook, adrenaline still spiked. Chen swallowed hard, his voice a hoarse whisper. Who are you? Anna sheathed the knife. A soldier, she said simply. Then she turned, already walking back toward the ridge. Move. They obeyed, but the silence between them thickened. The whispers that had filled the hangar before were now alive in their throats. They had seen her. Not just her stillness, not just her calm. They had seen Kestrel. The trek back to Fort Griffin was brutal. Every shadow felt like eyes. Every crack of ice echoed like gunfire. The soldiers' fear had changed shape. Before, it was fear of the storm, fear of failure. Now it was fear of what hunted them and what walked beside them. When they finally reached the perimeter, guards ushered them through with nervous urgency. Davies was waiting, his face pale as frost. He demanded explanations, shouted questions, but Anna cut through his noise with a single sentence. Your base is compromised. The words hit harder than alarms. Davies' mouth opened, closed. He wanted to argue, to dismiss. But the men behind her, their haunted eyes, their trembling hands, were proof enough. That night the base didn't sleep. Searchlights swept the perimeter. Radios crackled. Orders barked through clenched teeth. But Anna didn't stay in the command center. She sat alone on the edge of the motor pool, knife balanced across her knees, watching the dark tree line like an old adversary. Thorne found her there hours later. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, hands shoved deep in his pockets, eyes fixed on the same shadows. You can't hide it anymore, he said finally. Anna didn't answer. They know who you are or what you are, even if they don't say it out loud. His voice dropped, Hell, I know, I saw it. Anna's eyes stayed on the tree line. And what did you see, Sergeant? Thorne hesitated. He wanted to say a killer. He wanted to say a ghost. But what came out was softer. Someone who didn't let us die. Her jaw tightened, just enough to betray a crack in the stillness. I didn't do it for you. I know. His tone carried no resentment, only respect. That's what makes it real. The silence stretched. Not heavy this time, but strangely companionable. For the first time, she felt that Thorne didn't see her as a threat to his authority, or a woman to be mocked, or a myth to be worshipped. He saw her as what she had always been, a soldier who carried weight others couldn't. The following day, the base was formally locked down. Outside teams swept the forest, but nothing was found. The saboteurs had vanished as if swallowed by the snow. Official reports would say the danger was exaggerated, a false alarm. But the men who had been there knew the truth. And so did Colonel Davies. He summoned Anna to his office, the same polished desk where he had dismissed her days earlier. His voice was measured, careful. "Warrant Officer Petrova," he began, each syllable clipped. "What you did out there was beyond protocol, beyond training. You overstepped." Anna stood silent, her face unreadable. Davies leaned forward. "But you also saved lives, more than once. Sergeant Major Vance may see fit to glorify you, but I run this command. And I need to know, are you going to be a problem for me?" Her eyes met his. No triumph, no challenge, just the same placid depth that had unnerved him from the start. "I am not your problem," she said quietly. "I am your solution." The words unsettled him more than silence. When she left his office, Chen was waiting in the hall. He didn't salute this time. He just looked at her, searching for something in her expression, something human. "You don't want to be Kestrel, do you?" he asked softly. For a moment she almost answered, almost told him the truth, that Kestrel was not a choice but a shadow, a role the world forced on her when silence failed. That she wanted nothing more than to be Anna Petrova, a name without stories, a life without ghosts. But she didn't say any of that. She just walked past him, boots striking the floor in even rhythm. That night, alone in her barracks, she sat with the bent knife again. She had sharpened it, honed it, turned its flaw into strength. She turned it slowly in her hands, the crooked tip catching the dim light. It had been meant to break her. It hadn't. It had been meant to mark her as weak. Instead, it had marked her as something else entirely. A survivor. She set the knife down on the nightstand, angled toward the window where the Alaskan wilderness stretched dark and endless. The stars burned faint against the vast black sky. The forest was quiet for now. Anna exhaled slowly, her chest rising and falling with the calm of someone who had seen too much, lost too much, survived too much to mistake quiet for peace. She knew the myth would follow her. She knew whispers would spread, salutes would sharpen, men would look at her with awe instead of understanding. But she also knew this. The myth wasn't who she was. It was what the world needed her to be. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.